The lesson of this is that nobody can stay on the top forever. That's what Imam Ghazali learned. He was in a delusional state. And he was given a great gift. And the great gift is to find yourself at the bottom. That's actually a great gift from God. People don't want it, but it's a great gift because a lot of openings come with it. The openings don't come, opportunities come with that regno, because you can do a lot of good, but most people don't. When they're on top, they squander it. Even the technological conquest of nature may be a temporary 12 o'clock victory. Right? This is what people think now, oh, we can solve all these problems with technology. Maybe the technology will actually end up destroying us. Think of 6 o'clock calamities like global warming, environmental disaster, and nuclear accidents. Middle-class Westerners outwardly may live life at 12 o'clock on the wheel, but the majority of humanity does not. Historians estimate there were roughly 400 million people on Earth before the advent of modern science and technology. Let's assume that 95% of these people lived at or below harsh subsistence levels. By the year 2000, world population exceeded 6 billion, and by 2012, over 7 billion. We're headed towards 12 billion, and then it's supposed to begin to bottom out, peak. However, today, although a greater percentage of humanity lives above a harsh subsistence level, in absolute numbers, a far greater number of people live at or below the level of medieval serfs. In fact, one researcher proved that medieval serfs actually lived much better than modern people, had much more leisure time, ate better food, right? We're not surrounded by all these toxins. According to the World Bank, 1.4 billion people now live on less than $1.25 a day, and 3 billion live on less than $2.50 a day. So there are 6 times as many people living at or below harsh subsistence level than there were in the Middle Ages. Is this progress? It is if your perspective on life is from the 12 o'clock view, but not necessarily if your perspective is from the 6 o'clock position. Regarding the barbarity of medieval times, and no one can deny that they were not barbaric, slavery, serfdom, torture, inquisition, crusades, it is only fair to note that in sheer numbers, medieval atrocities pale before the technological barbarism of modernity. Medieval tactics were gruesome, but their effect was limited compared to contemporary warfare. We have now all these medieval Muslims using medieval tactics that are gruesome, but look at the numbers. They maybe cut off 50, 100, 200 heads. The technology kills 1 million people. I mean, look how many people the American wars have killed in Afghanistan and Iraq. Okay, so you've got these medieval barbaric idiots chopping off a few heads, but look at how many people have been killed by all this technology. And this is the point. They're both barbaric. One's just sanitized. It's just sanitized. You drop a bomb from 30,000 feet, it's a lot easier than having to chop off somebody's head. But, right? What's the result? إن لم تمت بسيف مت بغيره تنوعت الأسباب والموت واحد. If you don't die by the sword, you die by some other reason. There's a lot of ways to die, but death is one. So whether you drop a bomb from 30,000 feet or chop off the head, they're both barbaric, sorry. It's just on YouTube, it looks a hell of a lot more barbaric when you're chopping off the head than it does some guy in a cockpit that's just pushing a button. But the results of the guy in the cockpit pushing the button are far more devastating for human beings than that idiot that just chopped off somebody's head on YouTube. So let's be realistic about this. In the 20th century alone, estimates of people killed through war, genocide. So in the 20th century alone, estimates of people killed through war, genocide, and liquidation run from a low of 80 million to a high of 300 million people. 300 million people. In World War II, everybody talks about the Holocaust. Nobody talks about the Russian Holocaust. Nobody talks about because they were communists. So it wasn't this nice little propaganda piece to put out there. 20 million Russians were massacred, slaughtered by the Nazis. 20 million. Can you imagine that? And the Russians won World War II. It wasn't the Americans. All the films show the Americans winning the war. Just look at the divisions of the Nazis that were on the Eastern Front, multiple times more than the divisions on the Western Front. If the Nazis never invaded Russia, we'd probably be speaking German right now. Seriously, the Russians won World War II. And then the myth of religious violence. Like, well, what is that? This myth of religious violence. Muslims, this is the most violent religious period in the history of Islam, probably. If you look at the historian who did the body count study, which is online, proved that the single most violent civilization in human history is the secular humanistic civilization. It's killed more people than any other civilization. The second is Christianity, just by looking at historical numbers. Out of the 7 civilizations studied, Islam was the 6th, number 6. The only less violent civilization than the Muslim civilization was the Hindu civilization. Amazing. Muslims are accused of being violent everywhere. The Ottomans, the Ottoman civilization was the most multicultural civilization in human history, and in many ways surpassed modern multiculturalism because they allowed minority communities to be completely independent. They had their own court systems. They could judge the people themselves. The Jews had their own court systems in Ottoman countries. In Iraq, they had 3 vilayat. 3. They had the Shia, the Sunni, and the Kurdish vilayat. They didn't force them all to live together. They let them live in their own environment, just like they're asking now for independence. Each one wants to live on its own. The Ottomans, that was their administration. Let the Turks control their own territory. Let the Kurds control their own territory. Let the Shia control their own territory. And let the Sunnis control, just pay us tax and we'll take care of you. Huh? Unfortunately, we have a mafioso, I'll make you a deal you can't refuse. I mean, they talk about Muslims want everybody to pay jizya. What's the Muslim world paying to American corporations if it's not jizya? It's all protection money. Seriously, look at the amount of money that Muslims are paying for weapons from the United States. And why are they buying those weapons? What, to fight Israel? They can't, because the F-16s that they buy don't work against Israeli jets. They're always one step behind. They'll never give you the technology that they've got. They give you the last, it's like buying a used computer. It's having okay, give the Saudis the 286. We've got the Pentium. Remember 286? You guys are too young. So no one stays on top forever. This medieval myth may well provide a more accurate understanding about the human condition than the myth of progress. Of course, neither story is scientific in any rigorous sense. However, since as one with a wide exposure to all humankind's stories, not just the modern ones, one need not accept all of Lewis's neo-romantic notions to entertain the possibility that the Western culture buried some of its gems along with its crimes in the past. At the very least, in order to face the adage of Santayana, those who cannot remember the past are doomed to repeat it. Head on, there is no harm in digging them up and seeing if they still shine. Okay, so that's very important. So I want to show you now the Wheel of Fortune in the Quran. And there are many verses that indicate the nature of this wheel. But I think the most striking, and this came to me in this Ramadan, reading this verse, which is Surah Yunus, in verse 21. وَإِذَا أَذَقْنَا النَّاسَ رَحْمَةً مِّن بَعْدِ ضَرَّاءَ مَسَّتْهُمْ. And if we cause people to taste mercy after harm had afflicted them, and Allah attributes the rahmah to Himself, but the darra is massathu, darra. Right? إِذَا لَهُمْ مَكْرٌ فِي آيَاتِنَا. And then you see them with their makr, which is their craftiness concerning our sign. We're showing them signs, and yet they're reinterpreting them for their own advantage. So we showed them how, okay, America, you're on top now, but it used to be Britain, remember that? And remember when France was on top, remember? And Britain wasn't on top. Remember when Portugal was on top? Now look at Portugal, right? Remember Henry the Navigator? They used to rule the world. Spain, remember when they were on top? In other words, don't you see the wheel? But why are you convinced your makr in our signs is to tell yourselves, we'll always be on top? And the thing about knowing that one day you're going to be on the bottom, you're going to be treating people a little nicer because maybe they'll be nice to you when they get to the top. Maybe one day India is going to be the dominant power in the world, and suddenly your sons are going to India to get jobs in their houses to serve them. Yeah. Maybe they're going to remember those stories their grandma told them about being a servant in your house. Right? What goes around comes around.